are such things called phone screens. Phone screens differ from phone interviews in several ways. One, phone screens are typically not scheduled in advance. They may last just a few minutes. They're often not very structured, and they're going to feel a little more informal. If the phone screen goes well, that's often when you would be invited in for a full interview, whether that's a phone interview or an in-person interview. I also want to remind you that as you're doing job searches, be really mindful to not ignore unknown caller IDs, particularly since we all are working from home, or most of us are working from home. You may get a call from a recruiter's cell phone. So while it's tempting to look at your caller ID and to determine whether or not you want to take the call or how you may answer the call, always answer any calls that are going to be coming in through the duration of your job search professionally. And we'll talk about that in a little bit as well. So a phone interview differs from a phone screen in that it is often scheduled in advance. They're going to let you know in advance that you've been invited to participate in a phone interview. There may be more than one person participating in the phone interview. And it is usually scheduled to last longer, often 30 minutes or so. And it's going to feel more structured because they're going to have a series of questions to go through. I always made phone screen calls for several purposes. One is to ensure that the candidate is still looking for a job. And two, just to do a quick assessment of their interest level and a little bit about their phone voice. So phone screens have a purpose, and I can make some quick determinations on whether or not I want to continue between a phone interview and a phone screen. All right, so there are pitfalls of phone interviews, and we are going to talk about those and then ways to compensate for them. But I also want to let you know that interviewers, HR recruiters, we're not a fan of phone interviews either. And so sometimes I think people think we do things as evil HR tricks. This is not one of them. We are not evil HR cat Bert. But there are some good reasons for doing phone interviews. Obviously, today we're doing phone interviews because that is the only way that we can operate and continue to move forward with hiring positions that we need to hire. Sometimes we do phone interviews because of distances, and so we don't necessarily want to have a candidate drive or fly in for an interview. So they do serve a good purpose, but we don't like them either. We're trying to make a very tough hiring decision on limited information when we're using a phone interview rather than doing an in-person interview. So again, let's talk about what are the pitfalls of phone interviews. We're going to talk about modes of communication. We're going to talk about distractions and how to minimize them, how to maintain engagement through the phone interview, and how to maintain a formal tone. One of the biggest pitfalls of phone interviews is the assumption that it is less formal than an in-person interview, and nothing could be further from the truth. So a lot of things that we'll talk about today, we would talk about even if we're referring to an in-person interview. And it is because they are meant to be just as formal in tone as an in-person interview is. So keep that in mind. Modes of communication. Experts break up the way that we assess each other into 3 different categories. We are taking in information from one another in 3 different methods, trying to determine a little bit more about the person, understand that they're going to be a good fit for us when we're doing interviews, understand what kind of level of experience and education and skills they have. And we take that in, as I said, through 3 methods. 7% of it is through verbal. And what I mean by verbal, I'm referring to the actual word choices that I'm using. And so that's a pretty low percentage. So while verbal information is certainly super important, it's not as important as the other 2 categories of vocal and visual. Vocal refers to how you say your words. Are you a fast speaker, as I am? Do you speak with an accent? Do you pronounce words differently? All those things factor into vocal, and it plays into a big percentage of how we're gathering information about another person. Do you speak loudly? Do you speak softly? Are you hard to understand? All those things play into the vocal. You'll notice that visual is 55%, which is huge. And 55% of that is things such as nonverbal communication, your body language, your facial expressions, what clothes you're wearing, how you carry yourself. That is huge. And of course, all of that is going to be missing in a phone interview. And so we're going to talk about ways to compensate and make up for that difference of that lost visual cue in communicating with one another. So how are we going to fill the visual gap? So we're going to have virtual visual cues. And the first one that I've put on here is smile. I don't think that any of us would disagree that when you have a smile on your face, the way that you speak is different. And so I encourage you as you're getting ready to do a phone interview to make some notes to yourself. And one of them should include to remind yourself to smile. A smile is communicated across the phone lines, regardless if it's a Skype call or a FaceTime or something like a Zoom meeting. So remember to smile. Because we all want to hire people who are happy, who are optimistic, who are pleased to be talking with us. So smiling is going to make a big difference. Don't forget to stay focused and engaged. This is going to be hard, and we'll talk a little bit more about distractions. But even when you're talking with a friend, it's easy to get distracted and to lose track of what the conversation is. And doing a phone interview is going to be even more important to stay focused and engaged, because you need to keep your listener hanging on every word that you're saying and making sure that they know that you're going to be a good fit for them. So staying focused, engaged is really important. Expressing your interest verbally, because we express interest non-verbally by eye contact and posture. We talk about this a lot at Dress for Success when we do first impression meetings with our clients, and we talk to them about the importance of good eye contact and good posture. Those things communicate a lot of things such as professionalism, but also interest and engagement. And so now that you're not going to have the eye contact and the posture, you're going to need to verbally express your interest in the position, in the organization, and the person that you're talking to. And so you may have to reiterate and say it vocally or verbally in a different manner than you normally would if you were in an in-person situation. Watching out for awkward pauses. So if you're in the middle of a stream of thought, you need to keep going, because if you pause too long, the recruiter is going to assume that you've finished with your answer. So just be careful about awkward pauses, and we'll talk a little bit about preparing your answers for most common interview questions. And I just did it. Keep from using ums and hums and those kinds of things to a minimum. We all use those kinds of cues. We all use those kinds of words. So if we can be mindful of trying to avoid them and keep them to a minimum, that's going to be helpful to you in your phone interview. Watch your pace of speaking. As I mentioned, I'm a fast talker in normal circumstances. And when I get stressed or anxious, I probably talk even faster. So know that about yourself. Know what things you might do when you're nervous, and make notes and reminders to yourself to keep you going at a good pace. Whether you're talking too slowly because you've overcompensated, or talking too quickly because you're stressed and anxious and you just want to get the dang phone interview over with. And remember, now more than ever, your only visual representation of yourself is your resume and your application. So make them spotless. That's the only visual cue that your recruiter is going to have of you. So now more than ever, please, please, please be sure to make your resume and your application spotless. And you're going to be lucky enough to know that we are going to host a similar web session next week on resumes. So we'll be able to help you out a little bit with making sure your resume looks great. All right. Eliminating distractions. Minimize distractions for both you and the caller. As I mentioned, it is really, really easy to get distracted on a phone call. So even talking to spouses or kids or family members or friends, distractions are everywhere. So you need to stay engaged in the call, and you need to do what you can to keep your caller also engaged. So it's kind of dual purpose there. Situate yourself in an area with little to no distractions. Depending on your situation, it might be a little more challenging, but do what you can in order to put yourself in a situation to be successful. I've put on here, maybe the worst case scenario is sitting in your car. And as awful as that sounds, it is super quiet there, and it would be a good spot for you to not have other things to direct your attention away from the phone call. If you have pets or children, try to get them in a different area of your living space. Again, trying to minimize the distractions for both you and the caller. If your dog's barking in the background, which mine might do, I'm hoping that that he won't, but it can be a huge distraction. So do what you can to minimize pets and children in the area during your phone call. Turn off the TV. Again, another big distractor. And, there's news pushes all the time right now, given the coronavirus epidemic. So just put yourself in a situation where you can turn those off during the time of the phone interview. Put your computer away so that you don't see text messages and news alerts and email alerts. Again, minimizing the distractions and doing what you can. While you're on the phone call, and I'm suspecting that most of us are going to be taking phone calls on a cell phone, consider the pros and cons of using earbuds or a speakerphone. And I've put pros and cons because I think that they are both there. The positive of having earbuds or putting the call on speakerphone is that it does keep your hands free for taking notes. And we're going to talk about taking notes in just a moment. The con of doing a speakerphone is, again, it's going to allow your caller to hear more of the noise in the background, and it'll be a distraction for them. So my preference would be to use earbuds, again, to keep your hands free, and it would help to keep the noise in the background noise a distraction. So if you're able to use earbuds or headphones, again, to keep your hands free, that's great. If you do that, I recommend that you turn your phone over with the face down. Again, so you don't see the text messages, you don't see the news pushes, you don't see that you've got 5 emails waiting for you, and just keeps you, again, focused on the phone call. Always make sure your cell phone is on mute. Again, same thing, so that every time a text message comes in, they're not hearing it. So again, they want to know that you're as interested and engaged in the phone call as they are. So doing all those little steps to help you eliminate distractions is going to go a long way. Uh-oh. All right, here we go. All right, engagement. So I've written down one tip is jotting down the names of everybody that's on the call. Typically it'll be one person, but it could be more than one. And I recommend that you write down their name because using their name and addressing them by name throughout the call will help to establish the relationship between you and the caller. It feels less anonymous and it feels more personalized. I recommend that you call them by Mr. or Ms. until they give you permission to use their first name. But again, making it a more personal connection will help you to establish that relationship and to help with the engagement of the phone call. I said take notes, and I said this for a couple of reasons. One is maybe there is something that is said during the phone interview that you might want to follow up on later, because during the interview, you don't want to interrupt. So maybe you jot down something that you want to follow back up on when they give you an opportunity to ask any questions. But more importantly, taking notes during the interview, again, keeps you connected. I can tell you that for me, I write down notes all the time, always have, through class and any other business meeting, not because I thought that there was an earth-shattering statement that was made that I was going to say forever and ever, but because the action of writing it down helped me to commit it to memory, but it also helped me to stay engaged in the conversation. So my advice is to take notes during the phone interview, just to keep you plugged in and engaged and not allow your mind to wander. Already said it, don't interrupt. Don't nervously blab on and on. Again, if that's one of your nervous tells, know that about yourself. Don't overshare. We're going to talk about how long your answer should be during phone interview questions. But if that's a nervous tell of yours, be aware of it and be mindful. Make a note to yourself to be careful about that and not to overshare. Try and make sure the tone of your voice doesn't sound like you're bored or tired or disinterested or inconvenienced. Again, maybe that's something that you're doing to make you, you're overcompensating for some other nervous tendencies, but be aware of how your voice sounds. So maybe you need to record it on your phone, leave yourself a voicemail and listen to yourself played back. Maybe you need to have some feedback from a friend or family member on the phone to see how you sound. but sounding as though you're interested. Again, this is going to be the only way that they're going to get additional information from you other than the words that you're saying, is to understand a little bit more about your personality, is to see how your voice sounds. So be mindful of that. All right, I have to say it. Just because it's a phone interview does not mean it's a pajama zone. So don't wear your pajamas for your phone interviews. Lots of experts suggest that wearing professional clothes really does make a difference for how you take the phone call. And it makes it feel more formal, because it is just as formal as an in-person interview. And I can say that my experience in doing even dress down days on a Friday, there was just a different feel, a different vibe, a different tone. And so I really recommend that you think thoroughly about what you're going to wear. Pants and all. I know there's a lot of conversation out there today about people doing Zoom meetings and wearing shorts on the bottom or silly things like that. But I seriously recommend that you consider wearing something professional during your phone interview. Okay, so before the interview, and some of these tips in here are going to be the exact same things that you would do for an in-person interview, but I think they bear repeating. So research the company, and this is a day or two before you're going to sit in on your phone interview. Places that you might want to research them, obviously the first stop would be their own website. Maybe you check out some of the names of some of the leadership team and go to their LinkedIn page to get a little bit more information about the leadership team. Perhaps there's been stories in the media about the company, so Google the name, and perhaps even go to Glassdoor to get some reviews of previous or current employees of the company. I do have one caveat about Glassdoor, and that is folks that typically leave reviews are often ones who are not happy. So temper your reviews or the Glassdoor reviews and understand that they may not include all the good and the bad. So just be aware of that. Print a copy of the job description or the job posting before you go on to the phone interview so that you can follow along. And perhaps as you're reviewing that job description or that job posting, you generate more questions. The other thing that I would recommend that you do is use a highlighter and highlight the points of the job description that either drew your interest towards the job or areas where you feel like you're particularly well suited, so that you can draw those out either in your elevator speech or in your interview answers. But those are the areas of the job description that you're really going to want to focus your time and attention during your phone interview. Review your elevator speech. If you have not heard of an elevator speech, today's your lucky day. You get to hear about elevator speeches. So elevator speeches are meant to be about 60 seconds worth of information about you. The name comes from the duration of an elevator ride typically lasts about 60 seconds. So you have that amount of time to tell your quick story. And an elevator speech should enhance or go past what is on your resume or your application and kind of does the color commentary. It does not mean that you include where you were born and how many brothers and sisters that you have. It's not meant to have the personal information, but it may speak to what's motivating you, what is on your long-term plans agenda. Those kinds of things would be typically included in your elevator speech. And as Tiffany mentioned earlier, we will send out a template for an elevator speech with the email following this, this webinar. So if you've never written one, on the back sheet, on the back side of the sheet that's going to be emailed out is a fill in the blank, and that will help you to get started with writing your own elevator speech. So if you've not done one before, I highly recommend that you do one before your phone interview. And where that's going to come into play is a recruiter or HR person will ask you, tell me about yourself. And that's when you can use your elevator speech. So make sure that you feel comfortable with it. Review commonly asked interview questions. So you can do that in a number of ways. Glassdoor may have some listed, but you can also just Google or go to Pinterest or go to several sites and just ask what are commonly asked interview questions, and think through what your answers are going to be prior to the time when the phone interview is going to take place. We also recommend that you prepare a response for the a potential salary requirement conversation. It often doesn't come up in a phone interview, but it could. And what you want to do is try to stall on the answer as much as you can, but you should have an answer in the back pocket ready to go. And how you determine what your salary requirements are several-fold. One is you may have just a bottom dollar that you cannot maintain your expenses without a salary of a certain dollar amount. Two, you can do your research and go out online and figure out through websites such as jobs.com or salary.com, find out what the common salary is for a position, and then determine what your years of experience are worth. If in the job description or the job posting they have listed a salary range, you should expect that you'll probably get the entry level if you have zero experience. If you have experience in that field doing that position, then you could anticipate asking for a salary somewhere in the mid-range or more. So it's all going to be dependent on your years of experience and your education. So think through what you would answer if they do put your feet to the fire and ask you for what your salary requirements are. Better to have an answer ready before the phone interview than while you're on the call at the moment. Obviously, write down any questions that you have. So you may have questions, as I said, from the job description. You may have questions that came up while you went through the website or through the LinkedIn pages, but think about what your questions are. And typically they will include some logistical questions, and we'll talk about that near the end of this presentation. And lastly, don't forget to charge your cell phone. Again, if that's going to be the phone that you're going to be using for your phone interview, be sure that it's charged. Obviously, as I said, most phone interviews last about 30 minutes, but they could go longer. So make sure that that is well charged up and ready to go. All right, so what to have ready? I recommend you have a copy of your resume in front of you. They're going to be following along on your resume right along with you. So they may point out something that is on your resume and have questions for you here. So it's easier for you to follow along if you have your copy of your resume with you at hand. Have a copy of your application if you can do that, because they're going to have that as well. And they have some questions for you on how you answered some of their application questions. Have your written questions, have your written elevator speech, and maybe you have some of your written answers to some commonly asked questions. But please be careful and don't sound like you're reading them. We can tell when you're reading. So be informal. Maybe you just write some high points there so that you make sure that you don't forget certain things. But don't read your answers either for your elevator speech or to your answers for commonly asked questions. Have a pen and blank paper for you to take notes and put your reminders. Maybe you write down smile, slow down, speak louder, whatever things that you need to do to make sure that you're doing on the phone interview. Write some tips and help yourself out a little bit. And have some water. You're going to be talking a lot, so make sure you have something to drink so that you can take care of that. Okay, so what do you do during the phone interview? And I've got a couple tips here. When the phone interview call comes in, say, "Hi, this is Cece." Remember, this is your confident professional handshake. This is going to be their first introduction to you. So make sure that you sound like you're ready for the phone call, that they are not interrupting you or that you weren't expecting the call, and make sure that you sound professional and ready to go. So that's super important to have your greeting professional and positive and upbeat. As I mentioned earlier, make sure to write down their names and thank them for their time. Say that you're happy to meet them, and just continuing to try and make that personal connection with a caller verbally. And that's a good way to do that is by using their name. So particularly if there's more than one person on the call, it may be helpful to have that name written down on a piece of paper in front of you so that you don't forget. As you do phone interviews, and especially if you do multiple ones, it's going to be easy to get names backwards from one interview to the next. So help yourself out and jot the names down. What else to do during phone interviews? Really, you should be mindful that the answers to your questions should be 1 to 2 minutes tops. If they want to know more, they'll ask more. It is super, super easy to blab on and on about an answer, particularly if it's a question that you feel really confident about. But doing so, particularly early on in the phone interview, is going to burn up time. And it's possible then that they might not be able to get in all of their questions that they wanted to ask of you because of using up too much time early on. And that's bad for you. So you want to make sure that you're allowing as much time as possible for them to get all their questions in and not spending too much time on any one answer. So kind of watch yourself for how long your answers go. Again, this would be something that you'd be able to do much easier in person because you're going to get the nonverbal cues. They've written down their answer, they've changed their posture, they've done some other things that let you know that, okay, we're ready to move on to question number 2 or 3 or 4. You're not going to have that benefit when you're doing a phone interview. So just assume that you have about 1 to 2 minutes per answer, unless they want to further probe you for additional information. So you'll have to do that on a phone interview more so. Okay, what should you not do during a phone interview? Again, please don't interrupt. It's unprofessional and rude, and it can really break the flow of the phone interview. And again, remember, I've mentioned multiple times, it's so important to stay engaged during the phone interview, and interrupting someone else really breaks up that engagement. So be very, very careful, and make sure to let the caller finish their thought, finish their question before you jump in. You should not ever answer, I don't know. This interview is asking questions about you, and you're the expert of you. So you should be able to answer any of the questions. I cannot come up with a scenario where you should be able to say, I don't know, and get away with it. So make sure that you have an answer for all your questions. You shouldn't bring up salary and benefits. And we talk about this at Dress for Success during first impression meetings as well. We really recommend that you wait for conversations on salary and benefits, at least for the second round of interviews, but certainly wait for them to bring it up. If they bring it up during the first round, then it's fair game, but it's not something that you should bring up. I recommend that you don't smoke, chew gum, or eat food. We can hear that. And so it's unprofessional and it's rude. So please don't do that during your phone interview. Typically, they're going to last 30 minutes. You can hold out 30 minutes without those items. So please do that. And again, avoid saying things like, well, you know, those are all just really super informal, unprofessional things that I apparently can't stop doing either. So just watch how often that you use those phrases. Okay, so wrapping up the phone interview. So thank goodness, sweaty palms, it's all wrapped up and ready to go. Take a deep breath. And this is where you might want to just double check with them. Do you have any more questions for me? Ask them either what the next steps are, when you should expect to hear from them, or when they hope to fill this position. Those last 3 questions are good indicators for timelines, and it's a good way for you to be able to know approximately when you might be expected to hear back from them. So those are all really good logistic questions. And you'll probably have some other questions that you'll want to ask as well that you've already written down before the phone interview. Lastly, and I think this is a really good tip, thank them not only for their time, but reiterate your interest in the job. Even if through the phone interview, in the back of your mind, you're thinking, this really isn't my dream job. I don't really know how interested I am in it. Stay positive and engaged. You don't know what could possibly develop from that. They might really like you as a candidate. They think you're a rock star. They would love to see you on their team in some capacity. So they may keep you in mind for another opening. They even might restructure the job opening to better suit your skills and abilities. And even yet, they might refer you to another recruiter. We all are networked. All recruiters are kind of networked with other recruiters. And so they might hop off a phone call with you and think, dang, I don't have a spot for this person, but man, they are really cool and really have a lot to offer. I'm going to call my friend so-and-so, who's also a recruiter, and see if they might have an opening. So it is super important just to go ahead and stay engaged, stay positive, don't burn bridges, because you don't know where they're going to lead you. All right, so doing after the interview, and this is not any different than an in-person interview. And again, this is maintaining the formality of a phone interview just as much as you would an in-person interview. So send them an email to thank them for their time, and follow up with a thank you card. I have told people so many times, it is such a rarity to get a thank you card. It is such a nice way to set yourself apart from your competitors. And believe me, there's going to be a lot of people competing for jobs. So anything that you can do to set yourself apart from your competition in a positive way, please do it. And sending a heartfelt thank you and reminding them of your interest in the position and reminding them of your skills and abilities and your good suitability for the position. That's all going to be great. Follow up. I always put don't stalk. Recruiters don't like to be stalked, which is why you ask them a little bit about their timelines. So if they tell you that they don't intend to have a decision on the position until next Friday, then don't call them multiple times before next Friday. They're not going to have any updated information for you. And lastly, stay patient. And this is probably one of the hardest things. I tell candidates that from the time I've got a job opening to the time I get a job filled, minimum of 12 weeks. And that's not the case in every industry and every scenario, but it does take a long time to fill a position. So there's a lot of backroom stuff that happens during the interview process and trying to decide which candidates to move forward with. So just try to do your best to stay patient. And that's probably the best thing that you can do. So that's it for my PowerPoint presentation. Tiffany, did you want to open up for chats or any other items that we might want to cover while we have time today?
Yeah, we can open it up for questions or anything. You're more than welcome to take yourself off mute and ask a question if you'd like to do that. But if you prefer to chat it in, you can do that as well. Cece, can you see the chats as they're kind of coming in, or do you need Liz or I to?
Yeah, I'll probably need you guys to do it for me if you don't mind.
Okay, yep, no, that's fine. So yeah, if anybody has any questions that they want to ask, Cece, feel free to take yourself off mute and do that, or you can also chat it in if you rather do that as well.
Hello, can you hear me?
I can.
Hi, CC. Thank you for this opportunity. My name is JL Jones, and I just wanted to ask a question. I was a quality assurance analyst for about 8 months. The last interview I had, the interviewer asked me, why did I leave? And the reason why is because I didn't like being a quality assurance analyst. So how could I phrase that in a way that would not make them seem as if I was down in the company? The company, it was wonderful, but I just didn't like being a tester. So.
Yeah, that's a great question. And so what I always talk about, particularly when we do the first impression meetings with clients at Dress for Success, is I always talk about figuring out a way to turn a negative into a positive. And so for you, potentially, maybe the negative was you didn't like doing that particular job, but you had some positive takeaways. So there were some things that you learned about yourself. There were some things that you learned during your time doing that position. There were some positive takeaways. And so you can still say, it had an awesome time working with this organization. However, I've learned that that position is not something that I feel best utilizes my skills and abilities, and I'm pursuing jobs that I think better suit my talents. So something along those lines would be appropriate.
Thank you.
Anybody else have any questions that they want to ask Cece?
Yes.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, Tiffany and Cece. This is Andrea Sims. I have a question. I might have texted to you. I'm not sure if you got it or not. But how can you explain a termination?
Right. So that's a tough one. And so I always say less is more in terms of those kinds of answers. And so probably what I would recommend is saying something along the lines of it was not a good fit. So whether you didn't fit in well with that organization or whatever, trying to remain as vague as you can about that. But we all have stories of people who have been terminated for one reason or another, and whether it was performance. Again, like I mentioned to the first question, figuring out a way to turn a negative into a positive. So whether you say, I worked for company ABC, turned out it wasn't a great fit for me, since left that organization. During my time though, and through that experience, what I've learned to do differently is X. So maybe it's digging deeper and learning more about yourself and figuring out what positives you offer to an organization. Maybe it's the way that you do goal setting and pursuing other opportunities. So again, figuring out the positives that you can take away from it without, again, burning a bridge and bad mouthing the organization or the supervisor or the situation. Just it was a situation that didn't work out. Does
Okay.
that help?
Yeah. So if it was, even if it was like, okay, yeah, I'll just stick with that. So yeah, that helped. Awesome.
Okay, good.
I have a question. This is Carmen Malone.
Hi, Carmen.
Hi, Cece.
Hi.
Let's see. Actually, I have two, so you can let me know if you want me to wait to ask the second one. The first one is, when is it appropriate to ask for interview feedback? I had a situation where I had a phone interview
Mhm.
and I felt like it went very well, even to the point where the next day the interviewer actually called me personally to let me know that even though I had done well, they had selected other candidates.
Mhm.
Would it have been appropriate at that time to solicit interview feedback or not?
Sure. Yeah, I think so. So typically, unfortunately, the answer is just going to be similar in that there was someone else who is better suited. However, if there's something that they thought particularly went badly with your interview, they would be able to share that with you. But if they told you that the interview went well, she may not be able to offer up much. There's a lot of things that factor into hiring decisions. So there's the hard skills and abilities and experiences. Typically, recruiters like to hire people who've done this type of job that they're hiring for in the past because past performance indicates future performance. But there's other things that factor in, and those are the soft skill things. And those also include how well will you fit in to the organization that I'm hiring you for. And so fit is a pretty nebulous kind of thing to determine. And sometimes you just get a sense that a person's going to fit in well to the team that they're getting hired for. And it doesn't mean that, Carmen, you did badly on the interview, but there was something else that went better on another interview that they thought that person would be a better fit. You can always ask for feedback and you may get some helpful tips. But if they told you that the interview went well, I'm not sure that they'll have a whole lot more to offer up for you.
Thank you. My other question, and let me know if you'd like for me to wait until other people ask theirs, but it has to do with feeling comfortable that you have not requested a salary lower than what they think it should be.
Can you repeat that question, Carmen?
Okay, yes. Sometimes I'm concerned that when they ask me what salary I'm looking for, that I might be, let's see, considered not a good fit if I ask for a salary that's too low. So how can I become more confident in what is the right answer?
Yeah, so as I mentioned when we were talking about the conversation of salary requirements, recommendation is to stall, stall, stall. And so doing what you can to avoid that conversation as late in the game as possible. A lot of organizations, I say that sitting where I'm sitting now, having worked at a public sector organization where salary information was public, it's pretty easy in those situations to figure out what salaries are. Private sector salaries might be a little bit more challenging, but that's where your research is going to have to come in and where you're going to have to figure out what average salaries are. Carmen, are you trying to break into a new industry or a new field for the first time? Or are you looking for a job doing something that you've been doing for a while?
Yeah, so I have two areas of that. Yes, I have been applying for jobs that I had worked at previously. And so I have an idea of the salary there. But then I've also been looking at a completely new area and I have an idea of the salary there as well. But, you know, it's just an idea.
Yeah. So I think, my advice would be when you get asked the question about salary requirements, and again, I said stall, 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 and I still stand by that. But I think where you say that salary is not as critical to you as it is for you to get a job with an organization, that satisfies whatever intrinsic needs you have, or it's an organization that you truly believe in or you want to be a part of, an organization that offers a lot of training and development, room for advancement, whatever things are super important to you, that's when you would bring that up. And then just saying, I anticipate looking for a salary that's commensurate with my experience and abilities. And so again, you've just bought some time. So typically when they're asking that question, they're really looking to see, okay, my job that I'm offering out here, you know, it typically pays $35,000. If I'm talking to a candidate who needs 100, we're never going to meet halfway. So oftentimes that's what they're trying to determine, is if you're in quote unquote the ballpark. And so maybe you offer a range, like I need, in order to satisfy, you know, my my expenses, I would need to get a salary that would range anywhere from $30,000 to $40,000, or whatever that number is. So if you can't stall for more time and they're really putting your feet to the fire, potentially offer up something that is in a range. Does that help you, Carmen?
That helps a lot. I believe
Okay,
that I was more concerned with asking for something that was considered too low and them feeling like, well, she really has no idea what she's doing. I was more concerned about that than asking.
Sorry, you broke up just a little bit there, Carmen. There is a little bit of a danger of asking for something that's too low. But it does say to a recruiter, yep, she's going to be something, you know, a person that I can continue in the process, because salary is not going to be a barrier. It would suggest that you aren't familiar with the industry or the position, or that discipline. So yeah, go to salaryjobs.com, find out what the average salary is in Central Indiana with that job title, and that can help you out a little bit too. Hope that helps.
Thank you. Yes.
You're welcome. Mm-hmm.
Do you have any suggestions? I had a Zoom interview today, so not phone, excuse me, but a video interview, and it's with an interviewing committee, but it was set up from an outside person in their company. So I have the email address for this administrative outside person to send a quote thank you, but their office is from home now, so sending a written thank you isn't necessarily going to work well because they're not there to receive it.
Sure.
But I would like to send a thank you. So I have reached out to that administrative person to ask if I could get their email addresses. I've looked on LinkedIn to see if I could, you know, send a thank you note there, or, but I'm just not having any luck beyond what I've done. Do you have any advice for that?
Yeah, sometimes companies' websites will have some contact information. Again, I kind of lived in a different world, having worked in public sector, and so much was public and transparent. So our emails were out there, our phone numbers were out there, our salaries were out there. And so some companies may be a little bit less transparent with that information, but I think you're doing all the right things. I would check the website, I would check LinkedIn.
Wow.
And if you're not having any luck there, then yeah, just go into the administrative person. And if they're not prepared or willing to give you that email address, then ask if they will forward an email from you. And I would imagine that they would.
Awesome. Thank you.
Sure. Any other questions?
Hi, Sissy.
Hello.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, my name is Reshma. I have a follow-up questions of Carmen. Actually, is it okay to say like I don't have any salary expectation? Does that feel good, or is that feel any negative sense to the interviewer?
Now, it feels passive. It feels like you're like you don't even really need a job. You know what I mean? And I get where you probably are. Maybe you're motivated for getting a job for various reasons, and maybe you don't have as high of a salary expectations for, you know, whatever reasons exist for you. But I think if you say you don't have any, it makes you sound, yeah, just not organized, not professional, too passive.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, sure.
One more from Carmen, if time allows.
Okay.
I've
Yeah.
I've had the question before of how long do you expect to stay at this job? What's an
Yeah.
acceptable answer for that?
Yeah. So they're probably trying to get at what your plans are, but they're probably asking that question because one of two things. One is they've either had a lot of turnover in that position, and so they're hoping to not have turnover in that position. So they're hoping to find someone who will potentially stay for a while. But two is obviously to determine what your goals and expectations are. And so I think an appropriate answer might be you anticipate taking some time to learn the position thoroughly, 3 to 6 months to learn the position and feel confident in it. And as long as you're feeling your intrinsic needs are being met, whatever those are, Carmen. So if whatever is important to you, staying busy, staying engaged with the clients, learning and growing and developing in the organization, whatever those things that are important to you, I think if you mention that you're prepared to stay in the position for as long as those intrinsic needs are being met. Does that make sense?
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
Sure.
Hello.
Yes.
This is Andrea. I have a question. Would it be too forward to ask, when it's talking about salary, what their, I guess their base or their entry level pay is, before you start negotiating?
Right. Yeah, it's funny. As I said, I came from such a different world where all that information was so transparent, and we always listed minimum, midpoint, and maximum for all of our salaries for all of our jobs. And so recruiters are probably, if they don't have that kind of environment that they're working in, they're probably a little more hedgy to give that information out. And so they're always battling with, or what's always in the back of their mind when they're getting ready to make a salary offer, is their internal equity issues. So if you're not the only person working for their organization doing that job, they probably have other employees doing that job, and they've had other employees doing that job for X amount of time. And so they're oftentimes not going to be willing to hire someone brand new making more than existing staff unless that brand new person has significant years of experience at prior locations or education or training. So asking what the minimum is not necessarily a bad thing, but it's probably not going to get you what you want to know. And you're probably not going to get what you want to know, which is what are other employees making at this organization. So the best strategy for salary conversations is that based on your years of experience in this industry, you would hope to get a job offer in this salary range, and just trying to be as open on the range as you feel comfortable being. In public sector, our salaries were typically pretty low compared to private sector, but we felt like we offset that by other things, such as your benefits were very rich in public sector. Your time off was very rich in public sector. And so we knew that our salaries were typically lower and we weren't going to be as competitive with private sector salaries. But as I would tell candidates who are interviewing for positions, I know health insurance benefits and paid time off is not going to pay your bills. And so I need to know as a recruiter if our salary, our base salary in public sector is going to meet your salary requirements. And so that's kind of where the conversation revolves around. And that's typically what recruiters are just trying to find out. Are we all in the same ballpark? Is it worth our time, yours and ours, to continue a conversation if salary requirements are not even in the same ballpark or not? Does that make sense, Andrea?
Yes. So would I ask as far as like what the base pay, or would I say entry level?
Well, yeah, base pay, but I think I would probably even do what you would do, in the sense of, can you give me a range for what this position typically pays at your organization? That gives them wiggle room, but it gives you at least a sense. So they should be able to tell you, yeah, we typically pay, you know, $15 to $18 an hour, or whatever the numbers are that they're offering up. But that should give you an idea if they're not listing it on their job posting or their job advertisements.
Great. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Cool. Does anybody else have any questions before we go?
This is Julie. I just want to thank you so much for the presentation and working with us with this new virtual platform. I think this is going to be a game changer for Dress for Success going forward. And I also want to thank all the participants for logging on and doing the training virtually. Please let us know any suggestions or ideas that you have for us going forward.
Awesome. Thanks, Julie.
Yeah, so Liz went ahead and sent out an email to everyone on the call that has the PowerPoint in it. It has the elevator speech template in it. It has next week's topic for Workshop Wednesday, which is resumes, like Cece talked about. So if you would like to sign up for that, go ahead and click that link. And then we also have a flyer in there for virtual coaching. We have about 5 executive talent professionals who are going to help with executive coaching. So you are more than welcome to sign up for that. It's one-on-one coaching. It'll be done via phone or Zoom, whichever one you prefer. So once you sign up for that, you get matched with someone, and then they reach out to you to kind of set that up. So if you're interested in that, they're more than happy to help as well. The things that they're going to kind of be covering is resume review, interview prep, and then that one-on-one career planning or career coaching. So those are kind of the 3 things that they're specializing in. But other than that, you should have that email, and I appreciate all of you kind of logging on, and hopefully you got something out of this. Does anybody have any questions?
Oh, in regards to the email, I sent out it without the elevator speech attached, so you'll get a second email with that. Just wanted to let everyone know.
Perfect. Awesome.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a good day,
Thank you
guys.
so
Thank
much.
you.
This was great. Bye-bye.
Good. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Cool. I recorded it. We'll see.